Good morning and welcome. Like many of us, Karen Kinney, who's here today to speak with us about her book, which is called Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul, she has had the enjoyable experience of reinventing herself. From social worker to international artist, to teacher, to speaker, to author, and now expat. In fact, she produced a mural on what many of us call the Path to Life path. So if you're ever down that way, take a look. She's got a mural there. She's got many, many more very big things all over the world. So that's just one of her features. Her latest book has 3 sections, basically. And a third of the book is about enhancing creativity. And a third is about lessons we learn as expats. And a third is about personal transformation. She hopes that by sharing her experiences in this way, she will empower us all with a greater sense of hope, optimism, and possibility in our lives. She and I both call this personal renaissance, and we believe that many folks all over the world are experiencing this right now, post-pandemic. Just as Rotarians are imagining a new way, Karen has tips for us to imagine renewal in our lives. We Rotarians take action to create lasting change in the world, and she invites us to do that for ourselves as well. Please welcome Karen. I will interview her now.
Thank you. Is that close enough? Can you hear me? No?
It's green, Diego, but it doesn't seem
Is
to
it
be.
not on? No, it's on.
Are you good?
Is that,
Yes, it's on.
does that sound good? Okay.
First, I want you to see this beautiful book, and she is going to have them for sale afterward outside in Centeno in the restaurant. I'll be with her, and they're also available at Tesoros and online at Amazon. I'll tell you that later, but I just want to make sure you're familiar with what you're looking for in case you wait to buy it online or at Tesoros. Karen, first thing I want to say and ask you is, how in the world do we discover our inner potential? You've said that there's wisdom inside us, and there are paths to evolve, and I've never been given an extra path. I've kind of hunt and pecked my way around, so tell us.
Yeah,
how?
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think an important key is just getting in touch with our Dharma. So that would be, our Dharma would be where does our own desire and passion intersect with a need in the world. So that would be... Okay. Look right up against my mouth. Wow, okay. How's that? Is that good? Okay, good. All right. So I think one guiding principle to help us find ways to evolve is paying attention to our Dharma, which is essentially where our own desires, our passions for life intersect with a need in the world. So that would be a starting point if you're thinking about, the vast world of transformation and what does that look like for you and what you're offering. But I also think letting go of a linear mindset is really key because, as you're saying, when does our own becoming ever a straight line from here to there? Right? It's not. It's not my experience and way of life. And so I think it's much more often a curving road, that has detours, obstacles, surprises. So, and we're really trained in linear thinking. That's the problem, I think, with a lot of our Western educational system and a black and white kind of rigidity. But I don't find that meshes very well with our own evolution as people. So the more fluid we can be, I actually think living in Mexico, that's certainly been helpful for me in terms of embracing fluidity from the mindset I was probably raised in culturally. So, but I also think our own transformation, our own sense of evolution is really aided by being in community, because I think we're meant to witness one another. We're meant to call forth each other's potential, or observe a gift in someone else and affirm that, and vice versa. So I think if we can let go of maybe this solitary mindset of, well, this is my own personal path, of it is your own personal path, but I think it becomes aided and is stronger when we can do it in community and really together kind of create what we want to see individually and collectively. So.
Thank you. That's great. And boy, do I believe that. In the United States, we're thought to think it up all day long and then do it really fast. And in Mexico, the culture is imagine it and do it with great love. Right? So we're in a whole different culture, and we're due a paradigm shift to balance ourselves out. I'm loving these fans, but they're putting lots and lots of diamonds on Karen's face, so I'm concerned about how that's looking on Zoom, and Ron is going to take care of that now. If you need the fans on, please let us know, but for just a few minutes, I'm going to ask that they're off, just so that we don't have so many diamonds on your face.
Sure.
Okay, so what you're talking about is shifting, changing, really allowing us to go where our hearts lead us. How do we navigate that change? Can you give us a few tips on navigating that change? Okay.
Well, the first would be embracing the unknown, which maybe isn't our favorite thing to do. But most change usually ushers us into at least something different than we've known before. So the more we can surrender what is familiar and be okay with things being undefined. And some people are more adept at that than others. I'm not. I'm a very I tend to be a linear thinker, very I get things done, very, punctual, all that. So entering into undefined spaces isn't necessarily easy for me, but I think when we can allow ourselves to do that, it opens us up to profound inner change that we might not see. I think in the midst of a change or a transition where things aren't necessarily clear or you're waiting for resolution, you're not always aware of what's occurring underneath. But I think when we come out the other side of some kind of life transition, if we're paying attention to ourselves, there's the opportunity for our own kind of expansion, or we'll see how some kind of life event has really shifted us. And so I think if we can resist the temptation to exit periods of change prematurely, especially if the change or transition is uncomfortable or painful, because if we try to get it to end sooner than it's meant to, we can, I think, circumvent our own growth in that way, if that makes sense. So the more we can allow whatever the change is meant to embody, I think it behooves us to do so. The other thing I'd say for, navigating change is the more we can kind of adopt a mindset of abundance, and I would define abundance as looking at how are my needs being met, today, despite what my circumstances are, despite what's missing or X, Y, and Z that's not resolved. If we can switch our mindset from either anxiety or fear or whatever other emotions transitions cause, and really settle in the place of how are my needs being met, how are things being provided for in my life. I think that opens us up to seeing other synchronicities that might be coming across our path in the midst of change, or other sources of support that maybe we'd otherwise miss.
Thank you. I work with a lot of donors, and a donor came to me recently, and he had been a donor with an organization that I've been with for a long time, and we'd known each other for a long time, and he said, I keep listening to the news, and they keep telling me I need more. He said, I've started to believe it. I've heard it so often, and I need nothing. I have more than enough. So there really is a pervasive sound in our ears, whether we care to acknowledge it or not, that we're not really thinking in an abundant way. So I appreciate that message, Karen.
Yeah, and I want to say too, that's another huge benefit I've gained personally from living in Mexico, that I feel is a culture that embodies much more a sense of letting things be enough, certainly than the United States, where I feel like every message you get, something's lacking, something more, you have to achieve more, do more, earn more, be more, and nothing more. Talk about a message that will promote your own dissatisfaction. So I certainly enjoy that about the Mexican culture. I feel much more able to let things be enough, because like you say, generally they usually are enough. It's just our own mindset that needs to shift. So.
And remember, this is a professional social worker speaking. She knows wherever she speaks.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of us came to Mexico and we knew that there would be some reinvention. We're going to go to a completely different culture, a different language, a different set of laws, everything. So we knew somewhere in the back of our minds that we'd be doing some reinvention of ourselves. But we had no idea how much. Most of us, had not, even if we'd traveled to Latin America, we didn't know about living here, especially since every little place in the world is different, right? So how do we more kind kind of comfortably embrace reinvention? How do we invite it, and how do we flow with it?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's really helpful is just re-examining any fearful beliefs we hold around reinvention. Because fear is something that keeps us small, or it keeps us living a more contracted life than maybe we're designed for. So if and I think that just involves looking at what am I believing and why, and are those beliefs actually true? So I find that to be very helpful, especially beliefs that cause you to, doubt yourself or carry around fear around a possible reinvention that's not necessarily warranted. So that would involve just a little more self-examination around what scripts we're actually running through our minds. And I think also, along with what scripts we're running, to include the script that, trusting in possibility, or the idea of possibility, because I really think we're designed to evolve as humans. I think it's what makes us come alive. I think it invigorates us and kind of injects a sense of hope when we're on our own path of evolution, whether that's in our own life or something we want to bring into the world, to create in the world. It brings fulfillment. So just believing that that's part of how we're wired as humans, our DNA is evolution, and that we're designed to evolve. Another thing that's certainly helped me on, the varied career path that I've had is validating my own reinvention, as opposed to looking for an external reward or an external result or an external achievement. I think sometimes we can maybe shy back from reinvention, or not allow it to fully come forth until X, Y, or Z happens in the outer world, until I raise this amount of money for a fundraiser, or if you're a writer, until someone publishes my book. And so I think when you're looking for external validation, it's kind of a way of giving your power away. And there's nothing wrong with external validation, but I think reinvention happens more powerfully when you validate your own path from an internal perspective first. And then you were also talking about something about flowing, kind of aligning with what's flowing. I would say that's another really helpful tool along the path of reinvention is alignment. So not looking for necessarily the hardest path, or going down a road where we feel like we're banging our head against the wall, but a little more force will make this work. I find that's not very helpful. It's much easier to look for ease or places of flow in our lives. And I think, whatever we're designed to be doing in the world is meant to have a natural flow to it. It's not that it's without challenge, but it's something that comes more easily from us. So I think that's a key part of guiding our own sense of reinvention.
And I don't know how many of you want to raise your hands on this, but I think that just being in a more intuitive environment here in Mexico, I know immediately within the first 6 months of moving here, all of a sudden I was having very big, strong, intuitive feelings that I had to act on. And I would have said in the United States, wait a minute, that's just something, wait a minute, I didn't think that up, right? Mm-hmm. I might have just discarded it, but it led me on a path of wondrous things. So I'm excited that you're really able, through your background, to integrate both cultures into the wisdom you've put into your book. So every time I've talked to Karen, I have gone away wanting more, just because she's so fascinating. And as I was reading through her materials, I found out she's got a newsletter. So I want her to address that now, because I know many people in the audience are here just for her. Many people in our Zoom audience are not even in San Miguel. They're from elsewhere. They're friends of friends of friends who are here just for her. So I want to make sure that since they can't talk to her afterward, that they hear something about her newsletter, and that we do too.
Sure, yeah, so my newsletter is just a place to keep up with what I'm doing in the world, the creative work I'm putting forth, whether that's writing, events that I'm speaking at, or other creative projects I'm working on. And that's something I send out every 3 to 4 months, so it's not super frequent, but you can find that just on the very bottom of the homepage of my website. It's a place to sign up.
And that's KarenKinney.com,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know we've got a lot of visitors here, as well as a lot of Rotarians today, so I want to yield the floor to you. I want to come around with a mic and ask you to ask your questions. So if Diego needs me to, I will repeat the question, but please just speak into the mic and share your question. Who has a question for Karen? Or a comment? Yes, ma'am.
What is your definition of reinvention? Because can't we just be happy we're evolving instead of the idea of reinvention? To me is you're having to change because you don't like what you are. But if you're evolving, the whole process is more, in my mind, more positive. Or so what's your definition of reinvention?
I'd say for me it's the same thing. It's kind of more an organic evolution. So for me I wouldn't necessarily define it differently, because I think change that's meant to happen kind of naturally happens. I think that's a better place than, I agree with what you're saying, than something that's forced, like, oh, I'm dissatisfied with this, I must become this. That's not really a path of self-acceptance. So I agree. I think it's more just allowing more the fullness of who we are to come out, whatever that looks like.
Karen told me that when she was, she had written a lot, but not necessarily books. And then she wrote a book and she thought, maybe I could be an author. And so she sat here in San Miguel until she found out that she is. This is her second book. And so she reinvented herself by thinking, oh, it's coming naturally, but let me focus on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'd also say, I spent 17 years in California and part of that in LA. And so LA would be the land of reinvention. In terms of where people come to, well, mostly creative people. I'm going to be an actor, I'm going to be a filmmaker, that kind of thing. So that would be maybe another context in which I personally would think of the word, where it's more an exciting word. It's like, well, who can I become? But often it's tied to creativity, just from at least that geographic region. But it can be anything. It's really our own inner change and experiencing greater levels of freedom. So, yeah.
Sometimes it's just allowing ourselves to experience that freedom. Gary?
Being a long-time left brain dominant, how can I transition more to let my right brain take over?
That's a good question.
Explain left and right brain real quickly, just in case.
Yeah, well, I could speak to that. My father's an accountant, so I feel like I have fairly equal left brain, right brain. So I can and sometimes I prefer the left brain because it just feels more clear and defined. So I think allowing for process and letting go of the need to understand things, that can be a key. Kind of learning to be with what is and maybe not having to bring a very rigid definition to things. I think being able to maybe enter into mystery, and I don't know if that sounds too abstract, that phrase, but for example, for me, when I used to do fine art, when that was my primary medium, I had a hard time learning how to approach, say, a canvas. I wasn't necessarily a painter, I was more a collage artist, but the canvas, I'll use that word. I had a hard time approaching that and kind of just not having a clear-cut agenda or a left brain analytical view. So I think letting things unfold was a key for me, and learning to be more right brain. And also back to what I shared earlier, and for one of the questions Robin asked, releasing a bit of a linear mindset. So instead of needing things to go from here to here, and that's the only way you see the world, to understand, well, sometimes they can start here, then they can go here, then they can go here, and then they come here, and learning to be at peace with that, which can be frustrating if you're, efficiency and the other things that can kind of guide a left brain mindset. So I don't know if that's helpful or brings any clarity, but it's a challenging. I have that own challenge in my life, so I can appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Phyllis has a question.
Hi, can you talk about your artwork, just as such? And then maybe building on what the previous question was, can you talk about creative process as it can pertain to a transformational process?
And in terms of wanting me to share about my artwork, do you mean the kinds of art I made, just in terms of information?
Yeah, just like,
okay.
What did you do? Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I started out as a collage artist, so, made small scale collages, used a lot of torn paper, ink, paint. I'm a mixed media artist, so I used several mediums. And then I moved towards making larger scale installations using book materials. I would actually deconstruct old books, so books printed like prior to 1960, because they had a certain kind of coloring and feel that current day books don't, and made, I'd call them wall sculptures, but just larger installations. And then I also did a few public art projects. I'm not a painter, that's not my medium, but I did paint a few public art murals just because that tied into my social work background. And it tied into my DNA that art should be democratic. It's really for the people, whereas galleries can feel a bit less that way to me. And then your other question was about the creative process and what?
How that can, support a transformational process, or just talk about the creative process, period.
Okay.
Yeah, and how you can kind of get lost in that if you can let go into it.
Yeah, I feel like the creative process is very similar to a spiritual process on many levels, because there is the surrendering and kind of letting go of what you think. This is back to the releasing the left brain, instead of being dictated by a certain outcome that you must achieve. It's just kind of releasing all that and being present with what is, which I think can be a very spiritual practice. And I think learning to trust, for me, the creative process is learning to trust my own inner instincts and not second guess them. Again, kind of that's where my analytical mind can take over. I'll have a thought and then I'll bring in all this analytical judgment around it instead of trying to silence that and just allow what it wants to come forth to come forth. And also in creating, I've learned a lot about letting the creation be what it wants to be. I've found a lot of times, whatever we're bringing into the world, whether it's fine art or not, you want to build an organization or create an event, whatever, it has a life of its own. So it's kind of our job in the creative process to partner with what we're creating, as opposed to coming alongside and dictating an agenda without letting what we're creating respond or morph or evolve, if that makes sense. And also the process of visibility for me with creating has been a big part of my growth journey, and back to what I was saying about trusting my instincts, but trusting the value of what I am called to express and resisting the temptation to compare it to someone else's, or be like, well, I should be more like this, or I should paint, for example, like what's in here. Whatever it is, we kind of sometimes second guess our own contribution. So I think when we create, we give ourselves the chance to really value our particular voice and realize that that meets a need in the world, and we can assert that more confidently. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Okay, thank you. Karen just touched on spirituality, and when I was interviewing her, exactly half of the pre-interview questions had spirituality involved in them. And I said, there are enough questions here to take you to the UU. So I'm actually talking with the UU, because I'm a member and because I'm on that committee, about putting her into the pulpit and talking about the spiritual side of her work. So you have that to look forward to. Are there any other questions here before we take our Zoom questions? Yes, and Zoomers, please put your questions in the chat box.
I'm just curious, are you still doing your collage work, and also how does doing collage work or being an artist in that way compare to writing for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd say they're similar in the sense that they both involve allowing this creative flow. So what I didn't actually say in response to your question that I'd also wanted to say was, I think when we create, we can be a channel for something that wants to come through us. So I think for me, the experience of art and writing is still both that. Like I'm create a space where I can listen and kind of like allow myself to be a channel through times of meditation or whatever for what wants to come out. But I'd say the writing does involve a lot more of the left brain at some point, because eventually you have to like put a book together, you have to bring in organization and a linear mindset to produce the finished product, maybe more so than art. And I'm actually not doing as much art now. I've really focused to writing and back to the whole thing of reinvention or becoming. I feel like when I moved to Mexico in 2018, my goal was to become a writer, whatever that means. So I've written this book during the context of my time here, and that's where a lot more of my creativity is going right now than the art world.
And in fact, Karen's book is coming out in the fall in audio form. She's just finished finished voicing that for her publisher. And so those of you who listen to audiobooks will have that treat in the fall. Keep watching Amazon. So any other questions from our audience? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You next, and then Deanna. Laurie, I'm on my way.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you said that your social work informed your artwork, and I wanted to know what that connection was.
It did in terms of, yes, where I gravitated with my artwork. I pursued an art career in LA for 12 years and did do some of the traditional outlets, a lot of gallery exhibits and that kind of thing. But that whole world didn't really quite fit with my true personality. I mean, I did it because that's what artists do, and it's a place to show work. But when I got into public art, I did some public murals. That really tied in for me to social work because, first of all, when you're on the street corner doing something, like everyone in the world comes up and talks to you. So it feels very democratic, it feels accessible. I really believe in the value of art being accessible and not in, an exclusive space where only certain people can access it, that kind of thing. And I think even when I was involved with galleries in Los Angeles, I was more drawn to the ones that were kind of more, I don't know if gritty is the right word, but down to earth, or, that kind of let go a lot of the pretentiousness. I mean, pretentiousness is also just part of LA, but there were places where I could exhibit work that just felt more real and down to earth and pragmatic, and that I think fit my, I also come from the Midwest, so that's a pragmatic part of the country, and that ties into social work too, just meeting people's concrete needs. And one of the mural organizations I was involved with in LA, their whole goal was to go into communities that were maybe not doing as well economically and recruit volunteers and involve the community in creating these murals to help the area economically, as well as involve kids in the project. And so all of that kind of fit more with my personality and I think what the kind of work that interests me. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. She mentioned help. And I know that there are at least 2 visitors here today and at least 1 visitor online who are part of helping occupations or helping professions. And they're here just because they kind of saw that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Deanna?
Yes. So there's a lot of fear towards transformation and a lot of, how can I say, reluctancy towards change. So what will be the tools to pass that?
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of times it can feel easier to stay with what we know. I think one tool would be just asking ourselves, or if it involves other people, questions as to, identifying what is the fear that's holding you back, or why does this kind of change maybe make you uncomfortable? Because a lot of times we're not even aware of what we're believing. We just kind of put up resistance, a wall of resistance, and we'd like to feel comfortable and not stretched. But I think if people can look at change differently, as opposed to feeling like something threatening that's gonna make us uncomfortable or regret that we're doing it, to see it as an opportunity to maybe to connect us to new people, to tap passions in our life that maybe we haven't expressed. So any ways that we can kind of reframe it into something positive, as opposed to feeling like it's threatening. And yeah, again, probing, like, if it does feel threatening, it is why, like, what is that makes us feel threatened, and trying to get maybe at what's underneath that, and see if it's actually true, because a lot of times, we often believe things that aren't true, but we don't know if we don't take the time to question our own beliefs.
I think that speaks to acceptance. Sometimes we project what we think we're going to get. And if we don't get it, we're disappointed, instead of stopping and dropping and seeing, oh, look what I did get. And that's not necessarily lesser, it might just be different. And it's like, oh, look at this, it's even better. It's completely different, it's better. So I love that. Are there other questions from the audience before we go to Zoom? Live audience? Okay. So I will ask Ron if we have anything in the chat box. Okay. So I want to see, Karen, if there's any closing words that you have. We just have a couple of minutes before we wrap it up. So anything else to add that the questions prompted?
I don't think so. I mean, I appreciate your questions, and yeah, I think what I'm hoping to do with this book is just to remind people of a sense of possibility. So for whatever that is, and I didn't write the book thinking, oh, I'm going to plan to release this like right after the pandemic, and it just kind of happened that way. But I've had a few people leave comments on Amazon that have said, tying it to the pandemic in the sense that it's saying that it kind of gave a renewed sense of possibility and hope just about life, and I think we all need that. It's just been a difficult, obviously, past couple of years, and so I hope that things I've written can impart that. So that's what
I'll tell you, in reading all of her information, her background information, I thought this is one of the clearest people I have ever had the opportunity to be just exposed to. So I encourage you to meet us after the meeting, to come see her out in Centeno, to take a look at her book. If you can't do it today, please, it's in Tesoros. Give the bib some business. And of course, online, you can get it at Amazon. So I want to thank you, Karen, and ask everybody else to thank you too.
Thank you, Robin.
Tesoros is the bookstore here, is that correct? Yep, okay. So, thank you very much for coming. This was a fascinating discussion. Karen, we have a little gift for you, but I don't have it right now. I'll give it to you in a minute. And I hope everybody has a fantastic week. And we're adjourned.